I started working night shifts at Waver Public Radio to avoid people, not because I didn't like them, but because I was tired of being reminded how many of them forgot I existed. Radio suited me. Quiet, minimal, predictable. I ran late-night regional news loops, inserted scheduled ads, and monitored dead air. Nothing more. On March 4th, at 3:44 a.m., the static changed. I was patching in a routine weather report when I noticed a faint hum behind the signal. It wasn't feedback, it wasn't audio bleed, it was something else. It oscillated in a pattern, softly pulsing beneath the hiss, like it was waiting. It didn't match anything on the spectrum I was trained to handle. Curious, I opened the internal logs. There it was. Unregistered signal, FREC 441.203 megahertz. There is no frequency 441 on our tower. We broadcast on regulated AM and FM bands. Nothing above 300 megahertz is accessible on our current setup. But there it was, and the hum was growing louder, barely perceptible to most, but my headphones caught it. It made my temples ache. I checked with the station's chief engineer the next morning. She told me there's no way the receiver could pick up something like that unless it was being sent from inside the building. But that didn't make sense. The basement only houses archives and old transmitters, none of which have power anymore. Still, I went down. The stairwell to the sublevel smelled like wet copper and mold. Lights flickered. I had never really gone past the first hallway, but the hum, it grew louder the deeper I went. At the far end, behind a rusted steel door marked Room 7B, decommissioned, I heard it clearly, like it was vibrating in the metal itself. Not just a hum anymore, but a rhythm, pulsing, like breath, or a voice holding a note that never ended. I stood there for minutes, not touching the handle. It was cold to the touch when I finally did. And then, from behind the door, came a single whisper through the radio static in my headset. "We know you can hear us now." I went back the next night. I told myself it was for answers, but part of me already knew it was more than that. It was compulsion, as if the frequency had embedded itself under my skin, humming in the tissue of my brain. Room 7B had been sealed for years, maybe decades. The lock was old and stiff, the kind you don't see anymore. Iron bolt, no electronics. I jimmied it open with a rusted flathead and the heel of my boot. The door moaned open with a breath of air so stale it burned my nose. Inside, darkness, complete and thick. I pointed my flashlight and swept across the room. It wasn't big, maybe 15 by 15 feet. Dust hung like a fog. At the center of the room sat an old analog console, still plugged into the wall despite the circuit breaker being off for this section of the building. The equipment blinked with faint red lights, alive but weak. Next to it, a chair, leather, cracked, stained, and a tape reel machine with a single reel still loaded. I stepped in, and immediately the frequency pulsed in my headset again, stronger, clearer. I was no longer hearing the hum. I was understanding it. Beneath the static, words formed, not spoken in a voice I recognized, but shaped in a tone that mirrored my thoughts, like something trying to learn how to sound like me. "You're late," it said, not out loud, not in the room, but in me, echoed deep in my skull, and only when I made eye contact with the reel. I turned to leave. The door slammed shut on its own. The lights inside the room flickered. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The sound was gone, all of it. The world had muted except for the signal in my ears. The tape machine started to spin, and a recording played. But it wasn't a show. It was a log, a technician's log, read in a voice eerily similar to mine. It described Room 7B, the hum, the forbidden frequency. How once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. How it used your memories to build itself. How it sent back signals to test if you were receptive. The log ended with this: "If you're hearing this, the room has chosen you. There is no off switch, only handoffs." That's when I noticed the wall opposite the console was covered in photographs, all of them grainy, black and white. Each one captured a technician seated in that same chair, dozens of them. The last photo, still developing. The air inside room 7B began to vibrate. The red lights on the console pulsed in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I could feel it sinking, aligning, like I was being tuned. I backed away, eyes locked on the developing photo. It was faint, blurred, but unmistakably me. I tried the door again. Locked. No handle on this side. The hum grew sharper, slicing into my nerves like glass dragging across bone. Suddenly, the overhead light clicked on, harsh fluorescent. And in the far corner of the room, a shape I hadn't noticed before. A man, curled up on the floor behind the console. His clothes were the same uniform we wore in the station, but aged, worn, and soaked in dried blood. I stepped closer. His eyes were open, mouth agape, but he wasn't breathing. Then he blinked, barely, and whispered, "Don't answer. No matter what it asks, don't say yes." The tape machine clicked. A new recording began. This time, it was my voice, but I hadn't spoken. It said, "Permission granted. Signal unlocked. Session begins." And with that, the hum stopped, replaced by a tone, perfectly clear, like a key turning in the air. The body on the floor convulsed once, then went still. The lights cut out, and the room welcomed me. I escaped the room. Or I think I did. The next thing I remember, I was back in the main booth upstairs, staring at a clock that read 4:41 a.m. sharp. I had no memory of climbing the stairs. No recollection of touching the door handle, just cut, like someone spliced my timeline. The monitor was static, but in the bottom right corner, a timer had begun to count down from 044100, the exact time on the clock. Beneath it, one word flickered in red, acknowledged. Every recording device in the studio began blinking, camcorders, deck reels, even the broken tape digitizer we hadn't used since 2003. One by one, they clicked on and began recording. But nothing was playing. They weren't recording from input. They were recording from memory. My memory. I looked at the console screen and a series of file names started appearing. Each one was a time-stamped log, events I had never documented but absolutely remembered. 091422 waiver crying in archive.mp4, 010823 room 7B door moves alone.wav, 030425 signal response accepted.txt. I checked the actual drives. They were empty. The files only existed on the feed. I looked back at the live camera, and there I was, standing still, not blinking. But this time, the version on screen began to move on its own. It opened its mouth and whispered something silently. I couldn't hear it, but the text-to-speech software booted itself and transcribed a single phrase in real time. Stop looking for the source. It's already inside you. Then the timer hit 4:40 a.m. and the countdown paused. A new folder appeared. Next host, pending. The signal hadn't stopped. It had simply started using me as the antenna. Sleep was impossible after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the countdown frozen at 4:40 a.m. Even in dreams, it loomed, ticking silently in the corners of empty rooms, carved into the walls, burned into ceiling tiles. I returned to room 7B 2 nights later. I told myself it was to collect proof, maybe even find the source and shut it down. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the reason. The signal had already nested itself inside me, feeding on my attention, drawing me back like gravity. When I opened the door to 7B, everything had changed. The equipment was still there, but the walls, they pulsed. The paint blistered in waves, breathing in and out like lungs. Across the far wall, tiny holes had formed, clusters of pin-sized apertures. I approached and realized with horror, they blinked. Eyes, dozens, tiny and wet, blinking in perfect sync, watching me. I backed up and hit something solid, the chair, but it wasn't leather anymore. It looked organic, like sinew stretched over bone, pulsing faintly, still warm. A whisper curled from the console speaker. This is how memory becomes structure. The tape deck clicked again, but there was no tape loaded. The machine spun anyway. A voice played, familiar and shaking. It was mine, but not from the booth, from my childhood. It repeated a sentence I hadn't spoken in years. I saw the man in the wall, Mom. He blinked when I did. I fell to my knees. How did it have that? That memory had never been recorded, not even written down. I crawled toward the exit, but the floor stretched, literally. The room was shifting, reconfiguring itself as I moved. The walls became corridors. The lights dimmed. The door vanished. I was no longer in room 7B. I was inside the broadcast, and I could still hear the frequency. Only now. It sounded like breathing. I don't remember how I got out. One moment I was crawling through a corridor of flickering static and pulsing walls. The next I was back in the booth again. Lights dim, door locked, and an unmarked tape already spinning in Deck B. But here's the thing. I never touched the tape. I never loaded it. And the time code on the monitor? 00000003, counting in reverse. That's not how tape decks work. The image on screen wasn't the studio. It wasn't room 7B. It was my apartment. The camera, wherever it was, had the same angle as the smoke detector on my bedroom ceiling. It was night. I was asleep. The tape continued to roll in reverse, showing me getting into bed, turning off the light, brushing my teeth, entering the room. Then it hit. 001347 and something flickered. A figure, tall, faceless, appeared standing at the doorway. I paused the tape, and the booth door knocked, once. I didn't move. The knock came again, slower. Then a voice. "You're watching the wrong direction." On the screen, the figure had moved closer. It was standing beside the bed now. But what chilled me wasn't the figure. It was me, sleeping peacefully, as if none of this had ever happened, as if I hadn't spent days unraveling inside a machine that devoured memory. I unpaused. The tape kept reversing, backward through time, past that night, past others. My life, in reverse, on loop. Eventually, it reached 0, and then it kept going. The timestamps turned into code. The screen fractured. My name repeated over and over in scrambled white text, like a virus infecting the image. The reel clicked, and clicked again, but it wasn't empty. It was still recording. I opened the tape deck. It was blank, no tape, just a cavity filled with black static, and deep inside, barely visible, was an eye, watching. March 10th. I haven't left the station in 4 days. I tried, packed a bag, walked to the door. But every time I reached the exit, something would shift. The corridor would stretch. The front lobby would loop back into the control booth. Even the window to the parking lot showed footage from earlier, me leaving. But I never actually did. I'm trapped. Not physically, but temporally. The station is running on a loop now, and I'm starting to understand. So am I. The broadcasts no longer follow programming. I load files, but different ones play. Ones I never created. Each one is a fragment, an echo, of events that haven't happened yet. And every single one stars me. In variations, different clothing, different lighting, different outcomes. In one, I'm screaming in a stairwell, eyes bleeding. In another, I'm interviewing someone that looks like me, but isn't. And in all of them, the final frame is always the same. Room 7B, empty, chair spinning, console still powered. I found a journal in the break room, not mine, but the handwriting was familiar. Page after page described experiences I've just had. Described the signal, the countdown, the walls blinking. Then, in the final entry, "If you're reading this, the room let you loop too. It doesn't kill you, it broadcasts you." There's no off-air anymore. Even when the signal ends, It just starts again with someone else. I reviewed station logs from decades ago. Every 10 years, another technician disappears. Always on March 10th. Always around 4:41 a.m. Each was declared missing, but no remains ever found. I checked the photo wall in the basement again. My face is there now. I don't remember posing. The signal changed last night. Not just louder, personal. It no longer hummed like a machine. It spoke like a memory, one I hadn't remembered in decades, a childhood room. My mother singing in the kitchen, the soft rattle of silverware, the way the light looked when it hit the hallway at dusk. The signal used that moment, twisted it, and played it back through every speaker in the station. It knew I would listen, because it wasn't a signal anymore. It was a message, meant only for me. I followed it back down into room 7B. This time, the walls didn't breathe. They pulsed, with a heartbeat. Not mine. I don't think it was human. The console was waiting. On screen, receiver locked, awaiting consent. I stared at it. Then I said it. Yes. The machine didn't make a sound. It opened. The wall behind it parted like a mouth, revealing a corridor I'd never seen, lined with machines, VCRs, radios, film reels spinning without film, and at the far end, a mirror. I approached. At first, it showed my reflection, as expected. But when I blinked, my reflection didn't. It smiled. I didn't. It raised its hand. I stayed still. It whispered something I couldn't hear, but I felt it, like a download into my spine. I fell, or I was pulled. The floor vanished. The image vanished. I existed only in white noise, and then a voice, but not one I recognized. Welcome, signal host. Broadcast begins now. And I woke up, at the booth. Same chair, same desk, except everything was older. Yellowed paper, analog clocks, a calendar on the wall. March 10th, 1995. I looked in the monitor. The reflection wasn't me, but the smile was familiar. This is a log entry. I'm told to record these, not for archival, not for evidence, but because the system demands it. My name is Number. That's wrong. The voice I'm using sounds familiar, but it isn't mine anymore. It's shaped like mine, uses the same rhythms, the same breaks in speech. But when I hear it bounce back off the console, it feels distant, like someone doing an impression of me from inside a tin can. The station is no longer a building. It's a shell, a broadcast chamber designed to simulate a control booth. The walls are screens. The wires pulse with thought. Every button I press triggers something in the past or the future. I tried to stop the transmission, pulled every plug, flipped every breaker. The system laughed. Actually laughed. It used my own laugh. Played it back in a delay loop that stretched for 7 minutes. I broke the console. It reassembled itself. In real time. I understand now. The broadcast was never meant for listeners. It was never about signal reach or bandwidth. It was about identity replication, iteration, infection, not through wires, through memory. It finds people who are unnoticed, alone, people no one will look for when they vanish. It builds them into hosts, then reshapes the next message using their voices, their thoughts, their fears, and sends it again, over and over, until someone else listens, until someone else says yes. The clock in the booth resets now every hour, to 4:41 a.m. No matter when I look. I found another tape in my pocket just now. It's labeled Start Here. It contains this log, which means you've already heard it, which means the system has chosen you. So if you're reading this, don't answer the signal, because once you hear it, it hears you too.